Hey, HannahMouse1 here. You guys might remember that a few weeks ago I made a video about Remus Lupin, and that video really got me thinking about one of my favourite Harry Potter theories, which I thought I would break down in more detail for you because I truly believe that it's a fantastic bit of world building that, while never explicitly outlined on the page, really changed how I thought about the wizarding world once I discovered it. The overall concept for this idea is that there are two generations of characters, Harry's generation and his father James's generation, and for each character in Harry's generation, there's a character who exemplifies or succumbs to their biggest flaw in James's. Each of the characters in James's generation doesn't survive the series, while Harry's generation lives on to hopefully make the world a better place than their predecessors ever could have hoped to. So let's talk about some of these parallels. The first is, pretty obvious. Harry and James. Two Pottermen with black scruffy hair, some skills on a broom, and a tendency to wind up on the wrong side of a detention. But it's also pretty obvious how James is the more flawed of the two. It's a big revelation in Order of the Phoenix that James wasn't the always perfect, virtuous man that everyone described him to be. He was arrogant, he was a bully, and in many ways he is the antithesis of Harry's core values. Growing up being relentlessly tormented by Dudley and being forced to live in a cupboard wearing hand-me-downs and just generally being treated terribly gave Harry a humility and a deep-seated hatred of bullies, which is why he rejects Malfoy's offer of friendship, why he's quick to befriend the Weasleys, whose low financial status and lack of pure-blood elitism often make them seem less than, and I think that James represents what Harry could have become if Dumbledore had let him be raised by a wizarding family, if he had been treated with all of the grandeur that the Chosen One might have been. James is, of course, killed by Lord Voldemort on that fateful night in Godric's Hollow, having grown out of that arrogance, standing wandless in futile hopes of buying his wife and son just a few seconds in which to make their escape. The second parallel, the ever-loyal best friends Ron Weasley and Sirius Black. The relationship between Harry and Ron, and how it mirrors that of James and Sirius, is outlined in Sirius's first few lines in the books. I thought you'd come and help your friend, your father would have done the same for me. In fact, both pairs become surrogate brothers to each other, although in reversed positions. The Weasleys treated Harry as a surrogate son due to his horrific situation at Privet Drive, to the point where Mrs. Weasley's Boggart becomes a dead Harry among the other members of her family. Sirius was more or less adopted by the Potters after he ran away from home due to his moral opposition to the other members of the Black family. I ran away from home, your grandparents sort of adopted me as a second son, which leads on nicely to the fact that both characters also have a deep-rooted desire to outshine their families. Sirius, as I just mentioned, felt a desire to separate himself from his family because of their pure-blood elitist values and propensity for the dark arts. And for Ron, we learn from the Mirror of Erised that his heart's desire, at least at the age of 11, was to stand out amongst a very talented family. Bill, head boy, Charlie, Quidditch star, perfect prefect Percy, Fred and George, possibly the most popular boys at Hogwarts, even little Ginny, not even at Hogwarts yet, but stand out as the only girl, and as the locket would torment Ron 6 years later, as he believed was favoured by their mother. And the flaw that Ron has to overcome is Sirius's extreme recklessness and cockiness. This is the hamartia that causes Sirius to disobey Dumbledore's orders and go to the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, a battle that he would not survive. And while Ron isn't entirely above a touch of recklessness when called for, he doesn't think of himself as invulnerable in the way that Sirius seems to. He's aware that things can go wrong and takes time to think things through before he makes a move, which is probably what makes him such a good chess player. He knows that he has to make sacrifices, even self-sacrifices, but can also take a second to think things through and make a plan, or at least follow Hermione's. So let's move on to this third member of the trio, Hermione Granger and Remus Lupin. Studious and hard-working, both are often the voice of reason and logic behind the more impulsive pairs we've already discussed. But what really links these two is that they're both seen by other members of the Wizarding Society as other. Remus for being a werewolf and Hermione for being Muggle-born. And this is what causes two distinct flaws in Remus that Hermione passes with flying colours. The first is that Remus tended to prioritise preserving his friendships with people at the expense of the morally correct thing. There are a couple of examples of this, the first being how he overlooked James and Sirius bullying Severus Snape as teenagers because he didn't want to risk his friend's rejection, and another is how he concealed Sirius being an animagus despite believing Sirius to be a highly dangerous escaped convict who was responsible for over a dozen deaths, as it would mean admitting to having betrayed Dumbledore's trust. Hermione, while she absolutely values her friendships, she acknowledges that sometimes you have to hurt people to help them and chooses to do the right thing. The best example is in Prisoner of Azkaban when Harry receives the firebolt and Hermione tells Professor McGonagall in case it was sent by Sirius, even though it results in Harry and Ron shutting Hermione out because they blamed her for Harry having the broom confiscated. Hermione knew that Harry being physically injured or killed by a bewitched broomstick was worse than him getting his feelings hurt. The other flaw of Lupin's that she overcomes is the former feels so ashamed of his condition that he's ready and willing to leave Tonks and her unborn Teddy Lupin at the start of Deathly Hallows because he feels that they'll be embarrassed by him and shunned by society. Hermione's attitude by the end of this book is that she is mudblood and proud of it. To his credit though, Lupin does return to Tonks, cares for her during and after the pregnancy, Mercy, and when he stands in the Battle of Hogwarts, it's an endeavour to give his son a chance to build a happier life, one in which he would not be judged or diminished for being a half werewolf whose dad is in the Order of the Phoenix. And unfortunately, Lupin would not survive the fight. So let's look at the fourth and final marauder, Peter Wormtail Pettigrew, and his parallel, though it grieves me to even humour a comparison between these two, Neville Longbottom. Both boys on paper start off as less than competent, never quite in with the main trio, more of a tag-along. We can also draw a parallel in that Hermione almost took Neville under her wing, especially in potions, for example when she helps him fix his shrinking solution, and Remus was responsible for accepting Wormtail into their group as he sympathised with the underdog. But what separates the two is that when push comes to shove, Neville worked hard and did what he had to do to improve and become a leader in his own right. When he believed that Harry was dead and Voldemort gave everyone a chance to swap sides, Neville refused, knowing that it would almost certainly mean a drawn-out, painful death out of loyalty to his friend. When Peter was faced with a similar choice, he crumbled under the fear and pressure, betraying James and Lily to Voldemort, and then betraying Sirius by framing him and letting him take the fall. I think that the real tragedy of this comparison is that it shows exactly what Peter could have become if he had been stronger, if he had stuck by his friends, and fittingly enough, Peter's death comes when he finally shows that slither of goodness that was buried so deep within him, and hesitates instead of killing Harry because he owed Harry his own life. And as punishment for this shadow of mercy, he was strangled by the silver hand that Voldemort had gifted, or perhaps cursed him with. Next, let's talk about the Potter boys' red-headed love interests, Lily Evans / Ginny Weasley. Both women are extremely talented, headstrong members of the Slug Club, and honestly it's hard to say what Ginny had to improve on, because when it comes to the little we know about Lily, it's all pretty positive, so I don't really have much to say about this comparison. You could argue that Lily's biggest flaw was the fractured relationship that she had with her sister, and Ginny certainly has strong ties of her cohort of siblings, but that's clearly got more to do with the Weasleys being good people and the Dursleys not so much. Lily's death was, of course, about as noble as it comes, with her making that crucial self-sacrifice to protect baby Harry, but there's possibly one more parallel between these two in their relationships with the next and final character that we have to discuss, Luna Lovegood and Severus Snape, the only pair in this comparison who aren't Gryffindors, being in Ravenclaw and Slytherin respectively. They both had tumultuous upbringings, with Snape's father often yelling at his mother in front of him, as we see when Harry accidentally causes the legitimacy spell to backfire and sees Snape's memories. And as for Luna, while her parents weren't exactly abusive, her mother would perform dangerous magical experiments with Luna in the room, which resulted in Luna seeing her mother's premature death from an unintentional explosion. They both also see parts of the magical world in ways that aren't exactly textbook. For our Half-Blood Prince, he literally alters his textbook, annotating and improving his copy of advanced potion making to improve the recipes and to formulate new spells. And for Luna, she believes in a variety of magical creatures that many write off as elements of fiction, ratspurts, nargles, and crumplehorn snorkax. What really links the two is the fact that these two are both relentlessly bullied, to the point where onlookers and bystanders see it as the norm. James and Sirius relentlessly humiliated little Snivelus in front of his peers, with the crowd gloating and egging them on, and people constantly teased Loony Lovegood for her unconventional views and whimsy, even stealing and hiding her possessions. But this also highlights the flaw in Snape that Luna overcame. Snape never grew up. He was so angry with James decades after he had been murdered because of information that Snape gave to Voldemort, I might add, that he could not stand to look at his son, a near carbon copy in appearance, ignoring the fact that Harry's personality is actually closer to his mother's, and Harry is able to outright enrage Snape with a bit of name calling. Don't call me coward, when I'd argue that a wizard of Snape's caliber should have let that slide off like water off a Kappa's back. Luna, on the other hand, is incredibly mature. She doesn't take the bait or retaliate against her bullies, insisting that her possessions would show up eventually and standing confidently beside her views and opinions regardless of how people react. How Lily and Ginny play into this is that they both stand up for their equivalent, Lily telling James to lay off Snape in the memory Harry sees in the pensive, and Ginny telling people, including Ron, not to call Luna loony, and supporting Harry for inviting her to the Slug Club Christmas party. And it's Snape's lack of self-esteem and his childishness that causes him to lash out as Lily, calling her a mudblood, losing the most important connection in his life, and this would haunt him until the day he died, and his final act was to reveal this truth to Harry and to finish the story that started the night that Lily refused to move aside and let Voldemort kill Harry. And that's the in and out of the theory. It changed how I think about a lot of elements of the story, like the significance of that final chapter where Harry is waving his children, the next generation, off to school, the next generation who can hopefully be even better than the one that came before. It delivers a message about hope for the future, that what we do now paves the way for a better tomorrow. And apart from that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did. It lets me know there's something to see more of. Join the Discord link down below, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!